that you don't have a country without borders. If you have borders, you should enforce that border. Democrats have not done as good a job as they should, period. End of discussion. That's correct.
The answer is apparently no from Bernie Sanders, who's getting heat for flying private jets to and from his Fighting the Oligarchs rally with AOC.
Think I'm going to be sitting on a waiting line at United, waiting, 30,000 people are waiting. That's the only way you can get around. No apologies for that.
Tell me what the moment was in that answer that you thought, oh, this is going wrong.
The United thing, because we all you're a man of the people. How dare I have to be with the people, right? That's what, look, it's a cheap question. It's a smart alecky question. So it wasn't a serious question. It was kind of trolly. But his answer was terrible. You can't defend this answer. Hey, buddy, we all have to stand in line. We all have to do this. Even if you have 1K privileges, you're still standing in line.
So Bernie Sanders is causing a little something of a firestorm in Democrat Party politics over the weekend after he came on this CNN interview and basically called out the party over allowing an open border during Joe Biden's presidency over the last 4 years, saying here, quote, if you have borders, you should enforce that border. Democrats have not done as good a job as they should, period, end of discussion. Now, to some, that might be a shocking admission. In fact, some are even going out and praising Bernie here for being somewhat of a principled guy, because after all, if you're a true leftist, you would want to actually be against mass migration, especially of cheap labor, because that would suppress American wages, right? Bernie supports a lot of things like high welfare benefits, high wages, low working hours. Those things do not work. They're not compatible with the idea of mass migration. But frankly, I'm not here to praise Bernie today. I think this is actually standing as yet another example of what an insincere fraud this guy is. Because first and foremost, I think the question here is, you know what, Bernie? Great, I get it. You're trying to reinvent the party. You're trying to basically now reclaim your 2016 self. But where was this the past 4 to 8 years? Where was it? Oh, what was Bernie doing the entire time, supposedly being the anti-establishment independent figure? I mean, let's remember, he's literally an independent, but still the anti-establishment voice of the Democrat Party. He was silent. He completely kowtowed to Joe Biden. And that's why, despite sort of, I guess, the populist unity that some try to pose between like Bernie supporters and Trump supporters, I have absolutely no respect for Bernie for that very reason, right? He's only now coming and saying it, right, after the fact that Joe Biden is out of power and basically the Democrat leadership structure right now is so utterly useless, they cannot enact any consequences on him, right? After the fact that some 10 million people have now been allowed into the country. Now you come out, really, Bernie, and say something about it completely disingenuous. And we'll actually show you that, contrasting here with recent statements he's even made about ICE. Because on one hand, he's saying, okay, yeah, you're right. We should not have opened the border for the past 4 years. Okay, fine, Bernie, I agree. But when it comes to the Trump policy of reversing the fact, right, that we opened the border for the past 4 years by, I don't know, deporting the illegal aliens, they say, no. Sure, it's only been like a year or two, but they've built a life here. We have to stop ICE fully embracing complete and insane radicals like Zoran Mandani and many others in the party who want to abolish immigration enforcement altogether. So truly here, it is a pretty complex issue to break down. But I think the central theme here is Bernie Sanders, as usual. Big surprise, I know, but he is completely disingenuous. We'll get into it, though, in today's video. First, though, folks, as usual, do us a big favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe if you are new. Subscribing to the channel is not only the best way to support our videos, but it also personally ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage here. And with that said, I guess let's just start this video by immediately getting into it. We can show you here what Bernie said, and then I'll explain to you why I think on many levels, again, this is nakedly disingenuous. But take a listen.
I want to ask you also, because I just heard an interview with a previous presidential candidate and Secretary of State, John Kerry, and he was asked about immigration, and Trump has won the war on immigration. At least that's how he got elected. I don't know about now. And Kerry was saying, you need borders. We have passports for a reason. The Democrats screwed up. They let that border be open territory, and they've paid for it. Now Trump is pouring, I think in this new bill, $150 billion into immigration enforcement by giving all this money to ICE. So what are you going to do as Democrats to address the legitimate concern about immigration and borders?
I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent.
Yes, I know, but you caucus with them. Yes, sorry.
But this is what I do think. Kerry is certainly right that you don't have a country without borders. If you have borders, you should enforce that border. Democrats have not done as good a job as they should, period. End of discussion. That's correct. But I will tell you something else. In this country right now, you have millions and millions of people who came from Latin America or wherever, who are working in meatpacking plants. They're harvesting crops. They've been in this country for years. They're law-abiding. They are paying taxes. And they are doing some of the most dangerous, underpaid work in America. So we have to deal with immigration broadly with comprehensive immigration reform. We have failed in that. Democrats, Republicans have failed in that for many, many years. We need right now to come up with some way to protect these workers who are maintaining the economy. Trump wants to throw them all out, fine. The price of food will double or triple. God knows what will happen to nursing homes in this country. So we need a rational, humane solution, not having people with masks on them, throwing people into vans, and then transporting them to God knows what country.
So already, I hope you can see in that short clip as to why this is completely disingenuous. I'll explain that here in a second, but I first of all do want to note that this sort of slight change in tune on the border issue comes at the same exact week that Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman, who is known as basically the moderate voice, I guess you could say, of the party here, uttered somewhat similar, not entirely similar, but in the same stratosphere sentiments where you're kind of going against the mainstream party line in regards to the recent issue of Trump and deportations. Of course, he went out and said something a little different, though, going out and slammed the Democrats for vilifying ICE agents, who he says are literally following the law, and explaining here in response to Zoran and a lot of these crazy lunatics that ICE does an important job, and the idea that they should somehow be abolished is utterly insane. So the big picture here is, maybe now that Bernie's saying it as well, there is actually this trend you can observe where the general rhetoric around immigration in the Democrat Party is starting to change. And I'll explain in a second why I think that is, because I was kind of vindicated. I've been saying this for a long time. But first, here was Sean Fetterman as well.
Absolutely unacceptable, terrible, awful. ICE agents are just doing their job, and I fully support that. And for me, and people in my party might want to abolish it or treat them as criminals or anything that's inappropriate and outrageous. ICE performs an important job for our nation.
So with that said, what exactly is going on here? Well, first and foremost, I'm sure some would point out that, well, technically Bernie Sanders is not saying anything shocking here, because for years he was actually sort of an anti-illegal immigration character on the left-wing side. And why is that? Well, as a matter of fact, when you go back and look at the history of the left in America, decades before the modern context of them basically figuring out they got a free voter base from all of this, it was invented, right? You look to Cesar Chavez, you look to many workers' rights movements in America. It's a simple reality, as I so often say. The reason why illegal immigration is so widespread in America is largely a byproduct of corporate greed, right? Businesses, factory farms, we're not talking about Farmer Joe here, factory farms, companies basically bring and allow illegal migrant workers. Why? Because they know they can pay them less, sometimes even pay them off the books below minimum wage. But even in that case, right? Even if they are, it's like, okay, you can force them to work extra hard, extra hours, and, you basically know, hey, if I get fired from this job, well, they can call ICE on me, right? And so this is the reality that Bernie actually called out before, right, back to 2015, saying here in this famous interview, for instance, that open borders is a quote-unquote right-wing. I wouldn't say it's necessarily directly right-wing, maybe in an economic sense, right? But sure, it is sort of a libertarian proposal, you could say, to bring in cheap labor. As he says, mass migration makes Americans poorer, which is true, right? Supply and demand, we understand that labor is also a factor out there that's driven by supply and demand. And so some would argue, well, that's Bernie being consistent in his left-wing views. However, as I'm going to repeat here, he's being completely disingenuous, but I do want to play for you this just so you can understand, right, how Bernie is sort of this character who postures that he's willing to go against the grain, but as we'll show you, when push comes to shove, he never actually does it. But first, here is a career of what Bernie Sanders has been saying for context here. And I think, frankly, in the modern debates over immigration, these are pretty relevant clips that we ought to show the world so we can understand, or maybe they can understand, I should say. But here you go. Take a listen.
Open borders.
Open borders.
That's a Koch brothers proposal. The idea, of course, I mean, that's a right-wing proposal which says essentially there is no United States.
But it would make a lot of global poor richer, wouldn't it?
And it'd make everybody in America poor. Then you're doing away with the concept of a nation state. And I don't think there's any country in the world which believes in that. If you believe in a nation state, or in a country called the United States or UK or Denmark or any other country, you have an obligation, in my view, to do everything we can to help poor people. What right-wing people in this country would love is an open border policy. Bring in all kinds of people who work for $2 or $3 an hour. That would be great for them. I don't believe in that. I think we have to raise wages in this country. I think we have to do everything that we can to create the millions of jobs. Do you know what youth unemployment in the United States of America today? If you're white, a white kid, high school graduate, 33%, a Hispanic, 36%, African American, 51%. You think we should open the borders and bring in a lot of low-wage workers? Or do you think maybe we should try to get jobs for those kids? So I think from a moral responsibility, we've got to work with the rest of the industrialized world to address the problems of international poverty. But you don't do that by making people in this country even poorer.
Well, gee, you don't say, Bernie. What a highly, highly compelling argument against mass illegal immigration. Wow. It makes people in this country poorer. Yes, it suppresses wages. You talk about youth unemployment, which arguably might be a bigger problem 10 years later than even it was back in 2015. I mean, post-COVID especially, massive problems there. Yeah, maybe we should not be allowing open borders, but notice how when push comes to shove, a couple things. First and foremost, right? So why has Bernie sort of changed his tune in the past couple years on immigration? Because, you know, even back to 2019, he was kind of saying if you have open borders, a lot of poverty in this world, you're going to bring people from all over the world. And I don't think that's something we can do at this point, right? But even back to later on in his campaign, you had here Bernie Sanders explicitly supporting things like climate migration. Climate change migration to the U.S., effectively opening the nation's borders to the entire population of the third world. I wonder what gave there, right? Absolutely correct. Is that Bernie, and by the way, I should note this as well, right? Even at a recent Fight Oligarchy tour, so he'll posture this stuff. He'll say, oh, well, wages are important. Yes, it is true. Mass migration has all these effects. But even at a recent event on his Fight Oligarchy tour, went out here and said, quote, we got to figure out a way to stop ICE, the very agency that is trying to remove illegal immigrants from this country, which hence would better quality of life for Americans in so many ways. So you can see here sort of the double act that's going on.
That undocumented people who have lived here for decades without doing anything wrong, who are terrified that they could be next. If you wake up every day afraid for yourself or afraid for a loved one, I want you to know, from me and from the senator, I see you, I hear you, and we're gonna fight like hell for you.
We gotta figure out a way to stop ICE from what they are doing as soon as possible.
So with all of that in mind, I mean, what exactly is going on here? Well, first of all, I think it's obvious, as we can show you by now, that Bernie Sanders is massively disingenuous, because on one hand, he says open borders are bad for those very reasons, but on the other hand, he doesn't actually want to do anything about it, which is something you're going to very often find with this guy, right? Same thing on trade, by the way. Long history of him supporting tariffs, supporting protectionist policies, but the moment that Trump actually did something, Bernie says, oh no, but not like that, right? But it's bad when Trump does it, right? So that's number one. But also, secondly, I think the big aspect here to highlight is that Bernie Sanders is a complete and total coward, which is a story you've seen time and time again. You know, there's a certain crowd on the progressive left to this day that still celebrates him as something of a anti-establishment hero. Because, hey, look, he stood up to Hillary Clinton. He stood up to Joe Biden. You know, he's not like the rest of them. But when push comes to shove, what happens? Bernie Sanders, for decades, fought for protectionist trade policies and closing the borders. Similar issues to Trump, okay? Probably on the domestic issues, domestic economics, not a lot of agreement, but those two core issues, Trump and Bernie historically were in alignment. And then what happened? What happened is that the 2015, 2016, Trump kind of brought tribalism, I guess you could say, into the Trump years to an extent, right, to politics. The left became this coalition of completely woke radical crazies. And instead of standing up to them like a true anti-establishment independent thinker would, he completely just bent the knee. And then, of course, when Joe Biden was president, instead of standing up, which, by the way, Joe Biden, you could make an argument, massively screwed over Bernie Sanders, because very early on in the term, Democrats were going to pass a $15 minimum wage, which Bernie, obviously, that's his big issue. They basically just took it out of the bill last minute. What did Bernie say? Did he get out there and criticize? No. He just basically said, we're going with Joe Biden. Okay, I'm just a partisan Democrat. But then when a Republican's in power, now I'm fighting the oligarchy. Now I'm against Elon Musk. It is totally freaking disingenuous. So that's number 2, moral cowardice. I think, however, number 3, perhaps an explanation for the trend you're seeing in the wider Democrat Party, maybe the fact that, as I've pointed out here time and time again, as I've tried to argue to people, they don't want to believe me on this. I will repeat here, though, I do not think fighting on the immigration issue, fighting on deportations, is a winning thing for Democrats. It is not the right strategy. And why is that? Because poll after poll, as we've shown you time and time again, shows it's not the economy even, it is immigration. Immigration, time and time and again, is Donald Trump's number 1 issue. It is the thing he is most popular on, and common sense of warfare, whether that's real or political, is that you obviously do not want to attack your enemy at their strongest point. That's just not a good strategy. Even if you make some damage, it's not really an effective way to go into 2026. But if you don't believe me, take a listen here to even recent polling showing that still to this day, a majority of Americans continue to want to deport not just some, but actually all illegal aliens, hence mass deportations. But take a listen here, and then maybe this could also explain why some Democrats, maybe like Bernie, saw the polling and said, okay, wait a minute, maybe we need to change tune. I don't know, not sure. Just something to consider.
Documented immigrants. So we have slightly different questions, but these were all taken within the last month. And there's real uniformity here. That's what I really think you see. You see real uniformity. Deported all immigrants who are here illegally, 55% of the New York Times. Marquette, 64%. CBS News, 57%. ABC News with a slightly different question, 56%. So what you're seeing essentially here is a very clear indication that a majority of Americans, in fact, when they're asked this blunt question, which I believe gets at the underlying feelings, do in fact want to deport all immigrants who are here illegally. There's no arguing with these different numbers because they're all essentially the same across 4 different pollsters.
So if they say yes today-ish, how has that changed over time?
Yeah, this is where I think you get very interesting. And so we'll take a look at that ABC News question in particular, because you can really see that there's been a massive shift from when Trump was first getting into office 8 years ago, right? Deport all undocumented immigrants. You go back to 2015, I'm going to come to your side of the screen, it was 42%. Hello. Go to 2016, it was 36%. Look at where we are now. This was taken at the end of last year, 56%. This is 20 points higher than it was just before Trump got into office the first time. So feelings towards immigration in this country, feelings towards undocumented immigrants and deporting all of them have become considerably more hawkish. And I think that gives Donald Trump much more leverage to go with the American people and sort of have these hawkish, some might say harsh, different rhetoric and also issue-based sort of going after immigrants who are here illegally. And so I think the American people are going to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt to do what he wants to do, at least if you believe these blunt questions, including this one.
How about immigration levels?
Yeah, okay. So this sort of goes in line with that, right? Which is, again, trying to get at the underlying feelings. Want immigration levels decreased. This includes legal and illegal immigration. Look at this. Last year, 55%. That is the highest level since the 9/11 aftermath. You go back just to 2020.
And this, again, legal and illegal. So people want less people coming into the country.
Exactly. They want less people coming into the country. Look at that. That's a 14-point rise from 2023. You go back to 2016 when Donald Trump again was running for president the first time. It was 38%. That's a 17-point rise. So the bottom line is more folks want people who are here illegally deported, and their overall feelings towards immigration have become considerably more hawkish since Donald Trump was first getting in office.
Well, okay, I guess the question then is, are Democrats going to take the hint? Maybe perhaps they are. I don't know. Finally, after several months of doing this, I don't think all of them have. But apparently Fetterman is saying this. John Kerry and Bernie Sanders somehow are agreeing with each other in this regard. At least saying that, hey, maybe we made a mistake for the past 4 years on the border. But notice how, right? See, this is a recurring trend you'll see with Bernie. Same thing with trade is that, okay, so he'll posture about the same issues Trump did for years, but when Trump actually steps in and does something about it, hey, and we actually do something about the open border, for instance, close the border and deport those people who took advantage of our open border policy, and objectively, in all the ways that Bernie Sanders does actually correctly assess, are making quality of life worse for the native citizens of this country. What does he do? Yeah, he'll still, even in that CNN interview today, go on later to say, look, open borders are bad, but, we should be able to keep all these people here. It's cruel. It's inhumane. Why is he really saying that? He's saying that because, despite the fact that his actual supposed populist working class voter base that he claims he still has today would massively benefit from deportations, he is scared of the woke radical left. As a matter of fact, it's going to be an open question. I'm very curious here whether or not they will be mad at him for this very interview where he even said remotely, we did anything wrong. It was bad to open the border to some 10 million people. But I guess in the end, that will always be the difference between the Bernie wave of populism and the Trump wave of populism, and hence why Trump won in the end and it became effective in the end, is because while Bernie just likes to talk about it, Trump actually tries to do something about solving these very issues, and that's a stark contrast.
Okay, he was the Treasury Secretary and I think the White House Chief of Staff, but you can still be incredibly stupid. What a ridiculous thing to say when he's comparing the conservative populism of Donald Trump and the socialist populism that we see from the left here. There's a big difference. The Donald Trump version works. Look at what's happening. The border is closed. The incomes of working people are rising. It worked the first time around as well. And what you're seeing in New York is a response to the failure of Democrat policies. Those are the states, the blue states, like here in California, that are the worst run. And what they've got in New York is a response that will make it even worse. Of course, here in California, we're going to have a response that makes it better. That's on me for next year. But the idea that this is a legitimate comparison between Donald Trump's populism and the kind you get from Bernie Sanders, AOC, and this guy, Mamdani, even more extreme, is completely preposterous.
But hey, newsflash, Bernie Sanders is being disingenuous. What else is new, right? Just another day in the lifelong career of Bernie Sanders. So let me claim to fight oligarchy, be against billionaires, and want to declare climate change a national emergency. Not just, it's a big thing to deal with, a national emergency, but let me also fly on private jets and then make excuses for it, right? Let me call out Elon Musk, let me call out the oligarchy, campaign finance stuff, while I use campaign finance dollars to fly on those private jets, and I supported Kamala Harris, who raised the $1.5 billion campaign largely from the oligarchs. Again, disingenuous person here, and that's why, frankly, I think the years of him trying to really do something here ultimately failed. Not just because his ideas were bad, although they were, but it's also because it's hard for people to respect or take you seriously when you kind of posture about this stuff, and then when push comes to shove, what do? Okay, Democratic establishment, okay, have your way. You know how it goes. So how are you supposed to be seen as a serious threat to their power when you act like that? And the answer is you're not. But with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.